Welcome back to the second session of literary adaptation, and we stopped last time on chapter 3, adaptation across media. In our contemporary moment, adaptation has exploded beyond the traditional page to screen trajectory to encompass an extraordinarily diverse range of media forms and platforms. Literary works now migrate not only to film and television, but to video games, graphic novels, podcasts, immersive theater, virtual reality experiences, and social media storytelling. This chapter explores the unique challenges and opportunities represented by different adaptation media, examining how narrative techniques, audiences, engagement, and meaning making process shift across these varied forms. We will investigate both traditional adaptation pathways, particularly the continuing dominance of novel and the short story adaptation to film and television, and emerging digital and multi-modal forms that represent new frontiers in adaptation studies. Understanding how different media afford different narrative possibilities is crucial for both analyzing existing adaptation and creating effective ones yourself. From page to screen, film and television adaptations. Film and television remain the most crucial and culturally prominent and commercially significant adaptation media, with literary sources providing the foundation for countless productions from prestige periods, dramas to science fiction blockbusters. The purpose and the process of adapting prose fiction to screen involves fundamental transformations in how stories are told. What was described must become visible. Interior thought must find external expression, and narrative pacing must shift to accommodate visual rhythm and commercial constraints like theoretical running times or episode structures. Successful screen adaptations navigate several key challenges. Compression requires reducing novels that might take 10 hours to read into 2-hour film, necessitating difficult choices about which characters, subplots, and themes to emphasize. Visualization demands translating literary description and metaphor into concrete images. Production design and cinematography. Performance brings characters to life through actors' bodies and voices, fixing interpretations that remain fluid in readers' imaginations. Sense and sensibility. Emma Thompson, a 1995 screenplay, balances Austen's irony with cinematic emotion, demonstrates how adaptation can honor source while embracing a medium specific strength. Frankenstein, multiple film versions from 1931, Universal classic to contemporary reimaginings show how single source generates diverse interpretations across decades. Dawn, Frank Herbert's complex novel, defeated Lynch in 1984, but succeeded under Violin View 2021, illustrating how technological and cultural shifts enable new adaptation possibilities. Bridgerton, Netflix series adapts Quinn's romance novels while amplifying diversity, demonstrating contemporary adaptations' role in cultural representation debates. The rise of streaming platforms has revolutionized adaptation practices, enabling longer form series that can explore source material with greater fidelity to detail and complexity. Prestige limited series like The Queen's Gambit, The Underground Railroad, and Station 11 suggest that television now rivals or surpasses film, and the uh, uh, um, the premier adaptation medium for complex literary works. These productions often attract major film directors and stars, blurring traditional distinctions between cinematic and television aesthetics while giving adapters more narrative space to work with. Um, Multi-modal and digital adaptations. Digital technologies have radically expanded the possibilities for literary adaptation, enabling form that previous generations could scarcely imagine. Contemporary adapters, including students in adaptation courses, now create works that blend text, image, video, audio, and interactive elements in ways that challenge traditions and traditional definitions of what adaptation can be. These multimodal adaptations often circulate through social media platforms, reaching audiences far beyond traditional academic or commercial distribution channels. Student adaptation projects demonstrate remarkable creativity within these emerging forms. Examples from adaptation courses include creating fake social media profiles for literary characters, producing TikTok style video summary that capture a novel's tune through visual and musical plots in contemporary settings, and crafting Twitter X now threads that compass epic narratives into serialized microfiction. These projects reveal deep engagement with source text while demonstrating sophisticated understanding of how different platforms shape narrative and meaning. Video adaptations, short films, parody, uh, sing-alongs, the trailer recreations, and visual essays that interpret literary works through moving images and sound. Social media reimaginings. Character Instagram accounts, Twitter, I mean X now, threads, TikTok interpretations that translate literary narratives into platform-specific formats, interactive digital works, websites, choose your own adventure adaptations, and hypertext versions that leverage digital interactivity, audio podcast formats, serialized audio dramas, soundscape interpretations, and podcast discussions that explore text through sound. These digital and multimodal adaptations raise important ethical and aesthetic questions, remix culture, the practice of sampling, combining, and transforming existing cultural materials, it challenges traditional notions of authorship and originality, while some celebrate remix as democratizing cultural production and enabling new voices to participate in meaning making. Others worry about copyright violations, decontextualization, and the potential for cultural appropriation. As we engage with these adaptation forms, we must think critically about issues of attribution, fair use, respect for source communities, and the responsibilities that come with transforming others' creative works. Now, let's summarize what we said in chapter 3. Adaptation across media, the specificity of medium. Every artistic medium possesses unique affordances and constraints that fundamentally shape how stories can be told. Literature operates through language, engaging the reader's imagination to construct mental images, voices, and sensory experiences. Film communicates through moving images, sound, and performance, offering direct uh, sensory experience, but limiting what can be shown within practical and temporal restraints. Theater unfolds the shared physical space between performance and audience, creating intermediate presence about restricting certain types of spectacle of intimate details. Understanding these medium specific question qualities is essential for analyzing how adaptation functions across different forms. The concept of medium specificity, while sometimes overstated, helped identify what each form does particularly well. Literary excels at interiority, display, and narrative flexibility. Film offers visual immediacy, emotional impact through performance, and the power of montage. Theater provides a communal experience and the electricity of live performance. Radio engages pure auditory imagination. Each medium's strengths suggest different adaptive strategies and approach distinct challenges. Literature to film. The most common translation. Film adaptation of literature remain the most culturally prominent and economically significant form of adaptation. The transformation from page to screen involves numerous fundamental shifts. Literary narrations, which can freely move between external events and internal consciousness, must find visual and auditory equivalents. A novel's intricate prose style may have no direct cinematic counterpart, requiring the filmmaker to discover parallel aesthetic strategies. Time operates differently across these media. A novel can be read at the reader's own pace with the freedom to pause, reread, or skip ahead. Film unfolds at a predetermined pace, creating enforced rhythm and momentum. This temporal difference affects everything from exposition to emotional pacing. What a novelist can develop gradually over chapters must often be compressed into minutes of screen time, requiring economy and visual efficiency. The question of point of view presents particular complexity. Literature easily inhabits a character's consciousness, presenting the world filtered through their perceptions and understandings. Film shows external reality, making internal states more difficult to access. Voice-over narration offers one solution through often clumsy one. Subtle performance, cinematography, and sound design provide more sophisticated methods for suggesting integrity without or interiority without abandoning cinema's visual foundation. Successful film adaptations recognize that equivalence matters more than literary fidelity. A scene that works beautifully on the page may fall flat on screen, while an invented sequence might better capture the spirit of the source material. The adapter must ask not what did the book say, but what did the book do, and how can film do something equivalent. Literature to television serial possibilities. Television adaptation operates under different constraints and possibilities than film. The episodic structure allows for greater scope and detail, accommodating sprawling narratives that would overwhelm a two-hour film. Limited series have become particularly effective vehicles for literary adaptation, offering middle ground between films compression and traditional television's indefinite extension. The serial nature of television changes narrative rhythm and emphasis. Adaptations can develop subplots more fully, give secondary characters substantial presence and more thematic complexity over time. However, episodic structure imposes its own demands, the need for episode ending hooks, recurring dramatic beats, and sustained momentum across multiple viewing sessions. Television adaptations must balance each episode's internal coherence with the large narrative arc. Streaming platforms have further complicated television adaptation by enabling binge viewing, creating television between or creating tension between episodic structure and continuous narrative flow. Adaptations designed for streaming often minimize traditional episode boundaries, functioning more like extended films divided into chapters. This evolution continues to reshape how literary narratives are translated for serialized viewing. Literature to theater, physical presence, and spatial constraints. Theoretical adaptation conference unique challenges theater occurs to immediate physical space with living performance and audiences sharing the same reality. This creates what we say extraordinary emotional intensity and communal experience, but severely limits what can be shown. Elaborate chase sequences, sweeping landscapes, and intimate close-ups lie beyond theoretical practical reach. These constraints demand creative solutions. Theoretical adaptation often embraces stylization and suggestion over realistic representation. A bare stage and simple props can signify any location through convention and imagination. Language often carries behavior burdens in theoretical adaptation with dialogue and monologue, conveying information that might be shown visually in film. Many successful theatrical adaptations lean into theater's artificiality rather than attempting cinematic realism. The immediacy of live performance offers compensations for these limitations. Actors directly address audiences, breaking the fourth wall with ease. The electricity of five reasons creates emotional connection that recorded media cannot replicate. Theoretical adaptation often emphasizes psychological, emotional drama, and the physical action, finding theoretical power in character confrontation and verbal exchange. One person shows represent an um, extreme form of theatrical adaptation, with a single performer embodying an entire narrative. These adaptations rely heavily on language, physical transformation, and the audience's imaginative participation. They demonstrate theater's capacity for intimate storytelling that invites audiences into collaborative creation of meaning. Radio and audio drama, the theater of the mind. Radio drama and audio books represent often overlooked forms of adaptation that work entirely through sound. Without visual elements, these adaptations must create complete words through dialogue, sound effects, music, and narration. This apparent limitation becomes a strength, engaging listeners' imaginations more fully than visual media. Audio adaptation requires careful attention to sonic texture and acoustic space. Sound effects must be clearer but not overwhelming. Dialogue must convey both information and emotion, and the music must support without dominating. The pacing of audio drama differs from both film and theater, accounting for the sustained attention or pure listening without visual reinforcement. Full cast audio dramatizations create sophisticated soundscapes that approach theatrical production in complexity. Single narrator audiobooks, while often close to reading than adaptation, still involve interpretive choices about pacing, characterization through voice, and emphasis. The recent renaissance of broadcasts has created new possibilities for audio adaptation with serialized formats enabling complex narrative development. Graphic novels and comics visual narrative hybrids. Adaptation between prose literature and graphic narratives presents unique challenges because comics and graphic novels are themselves hybrid forms, combining visual and textual elements. Translating prose into sequential art requires decisions about visual style, banner composition, pacing through page layout, and the balance between images and words. The static images of comics differ fundamentally from films, movement and form, prose, pure language. Each panel represents a frozen moment with the transitions between panels creating narrative progression. Time in the comics or time in comics is simultaneously flexible and constrained. A single page might represent second or years, depending on panel number and composition. Adapting prose to comics requires reimagining narrative flow through special and spatial arrangement and visual rhythm. Conversely, adapting graphic novels to film seems simpler because both are visual media, but significant differences remain. Comics readers control their own pacing, can study images at length and engage with page composition historically. Film imposes temporal structure and directs attention through editing and framing. Some films like Sin or 300 attempt to replicate comic book aesthetics directly, while others translate the story into more conventionally cinematic language. Video games, interactive adaptation. Video game adaptations represent the newest and the most theoretically challenging form of adaptation because games involve interactive that other media lack. When literature is adapted into games, the narrative becomes entangled with gameplay mechanics, player agency, and procedural possibility. The player doesn't simply receive a story but participates in its unfolding. This interactivity creates fundamental questions about adaptation. Can a linear narrative be meaningfully adapted into a form where player choices shape outcomes? How can character development occur when players control the protagonist's actions? Successful literary game adaptations often embrace these differences rather than fitting them, finding gameplay mechanics that complement narrative themes. Conversely, adapting games to film or literature requires extracting linear narrative from interactive possibility, choosing among multiple potential story paths, and compensating for the loss of player agency. These adaptations often struggle because the experience of playing, making choices, um, overcoming the challenges, achieving mastery cannot be replicated in passive media. The most effective game to film adaptations recognize this and focus on the game's world, characters, or themes rather than attempting to replicate gameplay experience. Opera, ballet, and musical adaptation. Musical forms of adaptation transform narrative through the integration of music, whether through operation and operas, through sung drama, ballets, pure movement, or musical theaters, combination of song, dialogue, and dance. These forms prioritize emotional expression and static experience over narrative detail, often radically condensing and simply or simplifying source material. Opera typically reduce complex narratives to essential dramatic situations that can support musical expression. The adaptation process becomes one of distillation, identifying moments of intense emotion that justify and benefit from musical treatment. Ballet takes this further, telling stories entirely through movements and music without words, requiring narratives with strong visual and physical dimensions. Musical theater occupies middle ground, alternating between dialogue and song. Successful musical adaptations identify which moments demand musical expression and which work better as spoken sense or a spoken scene. The rhythm of a musical, the alternation between dialogue and song, intimate moments, and in symbol numbers shapes how source narratives must be restructured. Cross media, aesthetic, and hybrid forms. Contemporary media increasingly blur boundaries, creating hybrid forms that resist symbol categorization. Formed theater broadcasts represent a curious middle ground, neither purely theoretical nor cinematic. Motion comics animate comic panels while retaining their essential structure. Interactive films and branching narratives attempt to merge cinematic language with game-like interactivity. These hybrid forms raise new questions about adaptation. When Hamilton was filmed and released on streaming platforms, was the result theater or film? How should we understand video essays that combine literary analysis with visual montage as technology enables new forms of storytelling? Adapting continues to evolve, finding new possibilities for translating narratives across an expanding range of media. Conclusion: media or medium as message. Understanding adaptation requires recognizing that medium profoundly shapes meaning. The same story told through different media becomes in important ways different stories. Each medium emphasizes different aspects, creates different emotional experiences, and enables different kinds of engagement. Rather than viewing this as a problem of fidelity, we can recognize it as an opportunity to creative or for creative reinterpretation. The art of adaptation lies in understanding what each medium does best and using those capabilities to find equivalent power and meaning across forms. Now let's go to chapter 4, critical approaches and ethical considerations. Creating or analyzing adaptations is never a purely technical or aesthetic exercise. It's deeply entangled with the questions of power, representation, interpretation, and ethics. Who had the right to adapt whose stories? What responsibilities do adapters have to source text, original authors, and the communities those texts represent? How do adaptations participate in broader cultural conversations about um, what we say identity, history, and social justice? This chapter explores the critical frameworks and the ethical questions that adaptation scholars and practitioners must navigate. We will examine how different theoretical approaches from post-colonial theory to feminist criticism to disability studies eliminate the political dimensions of adaptation, helping us understand how these transformative works can both challenge and reinforce existing power structures. We will also confront the persistent questions of fidelity, integrating why this concept has dominated adaptation discourse and exploring more productive frameworks for evaluation. The ethics of adaptation. Adaptation always involves questions of power and ownership. When a Western filmmaker adapts a novel from the global South, when a male director interprets a female author's feminist text, when a contemporary adapter reimagines a historical narrative about marginalized communities, these acts of transformation carry ethical weight that extends beyond artistic choices. Recent Recent scholarship has increasingly emphasized the need to consider issues of cultural appropriation, authentic representation, and interpretive authority in adaptation practices. Post-colonial approaches to adaptation studies examine how the adaptation of non-Western literary works into Western media forms can reproduce colonial power dynamics, extracting cultural content while marginalizing the voice and perspectives of source communities. Similarly, feminist critics have analyzed how adaptations of women's writing often diminish or distort feminist themes, particularly when male-dominated production team lack understanding of the source texts gendered politically. These critical perspectives do not necessarily condemn cross-culture or cross-gender adaptation, but they demand thoughtfulness, research, collaboration, and humility from adapters. Representation matters. Who gets cast in adapted roles? Whose perspectives shape storytelling? Adaptation decisions about race, gender, disability, and sexuality carry profound cultural implications beyond individual works. Authorial intent versus adapter vision, balancing respect for original author's vision with adapters' creative freedom and contemporary values. No easy formulas exist, requiring case by case ethical reasoning. Community consultation when adapting texts rooted in specific cultural communities. Meaningful consultation and collaboration can help avoid harmful misinterpretation while enriching adaptation. Adaptation as interpretation and critic. Every adaptation is inherently an interpretation, a reading of the source text that makes certain elements visible while obscuring others, that amplifies some themes while muting others, that brings particular cultural assumptions and contemporary concerns to bear of the original material. Recognizing this interpretive dimension helps us move beyond simplistic fidelity discourse toward a more sophisticated understanding of what adaptations do and how they create meaning. Some of the most interesting adaptations they function as explicit critics of their source texts, use the act of transformation to expose and challenge problematic elements in canonical works. Wide Sargasso Sea, Jane Rice's 1966 novel reimagines Jane Eyre from perspective of the mad woman in the attic, revealing the racism and the colonism underlying Charlotte Brownett's classic contemporary adaptations increasingly engage in similar critic work, integrating classics through lenses of race, gender, class, and sexuality that their original authors might not have considered. These critical adaptations demonstrate that transformation can be a form of literary scholarship, not replacing traditional analysis, but complementing it through creative practice. Adapters reading, interpretive act that selects emphasis and analyzes source material, source text, original work with its historical context, assumptions, and blind spots. Cultural dialogue, ongoing conversation between texts, interpretation, and cultural movement. Creative transformation, adaptive embodying interpretation through medium specific choices. Audience reception, viewers, readers interpret adaptation through their own context and knowledge. The role of audience knowledge and intertextuality in adaptation cannot be overstated. Adaptations create meaning differently for viewers, for readers who know the source text intimately versus those encountering the story for the first time. Knowing audiences recognize allusions, appreciate deliberate changes, and understand how adaptations will position themselves in relation to adaptation traditions. This creates layered experiences where adaptations simultaneously tell stories to new audiences and comment on those stories for informed viewers. Sophisticated adapters exploit this dynamic crafting works that function on multiple levels depending on audiences' intertextual awareness. Then let's summarize what we said in chapter 4. Chapter 4 was about critical approaches and ethical considerations beyond fidelity, evolving critical frameworks. For much of adaptation history, criticism centered on fidelity, the degree to which an adaptation remained faithful to its source. This approach treated the original text as sacrosanct, sacrosanct, viewing any deviation as betrayal or failure. Fidelity criticism assumed a hierarchy where literature inherently possessed greater value than visual or performance media, reflecting deeper cultural prejudice about high and low art. Contemporary adaptation studies have largely rejected fidelity as the primary evolution criterion. Scholars now recognize that literature faithfulness often produces lifeless adaptations that fail to harness the strengths of the new medium. Perfect fidelity is not only impossible but undesirable. A word-for-word film adaptation of a novel would be unwatchable, failing both as cinema as interpretation. The question has shifted from how faithful is it to what does this adaptation do and how effectively does it do it. This evolution reflects broader theoretical developments. Bruce Tractionist through thought that challenged the notion of fixed textual meaning, suggesting that every reading constitutes an act of interpretation. From this perspective, adaptation is simply a particularly visible form of the interpretive process that occurs whenever anyone engages with a text. There is no single correct way to understand a source work, and consequently, no single correct way to adapt it. Intertextuality and dialogue relationships. Intertextuality provides a productive framework for understanding adaptation, rather than viewing the adaptation as derivative of the source. Intertextuality theory recognizes both texts as participating in ongoing cultural conversations. And adaptation exists in dialogue with its source, but also with other adaptations, with cultural contexts, and with audiences' accumulated knowledge and expectations. This dialogic relationship means that adaptations can integrate or reimagine these sources rather than simply reproducing them. A contemporary adaptation of a Victorian novel might deliberately highlight aspects that make the original marginalize or question assumptions the original took for granted. The adaptation becomes a form of critical reading made public, offering interpretations through creative practice rather than analytical prose. The concept of the paralympistis, a text written over partially erased texts, captures something essential about adaptation. We experience adaptations with awareness of what came before. The traces of the source visible beneath the new vision. This layered quality enriches rather than diminishes the adaptation, creating complex meaning through the interplay of old and new. Authorship, collaboration, and creative agency. Questions of authorship complicate adaptation discourse. Who is the author of an adaptation? The original writer, the screenwriter, the director, the actors. Film and television production involves extensive collaboration with many creative voices shaping the final production. This collaborative nature contrasts with literature's typical model of individual authorship. Author theory, which positions the director as the primary creative force in filmmaking, offers one response to this question, but oversimplified the collaborative reality of adaptation. Screenwriters, cinematographers, editors, composers, production designers, and actors all contribute essentially to how an adaptation realizes its source material. Recognizing this collaborative dimension helps us appreciate adaptation as a complex creative process rather than a single person's vision. This relationship between adapters and original authors raises additional questions. Should living authors have approval over adaptations? What obligations do adapters have to the author's legacies? Legal frameworks address some of these questions through copyright and state control, but ethical dimensions extend beyond legal requirements. Adaptations inevitably interpret, and interpretation involves judgment about what the source material means and values. These interpretive choices have consequences practically when adapting works by marginalized or diseased authors who cannot speak for themselves. Ownership, appropriation, and cultural politics. The politics of adaptation become particularly acute when works are adopted across significant cultural boundaries. Who had the right to adapt whose stories? When Western filmmakers adapt non-Western literature, or when white creators adopt workers by authors or color. Questions of cultural appropriation and the power image. Adaptation can serve cultural imperialism, reshaping narratives to suit dominant perspectives, and erasing cultural specificity. These concerns are not merely theoretical. The history of adaptation includes numerous examples of cultural appropriation. Stories taken from their original context, stripped of cultural meanings, and reshaped for different audiences. Then says adaptations of folk tales from various cultures. Hollywood treatment of non-Western stories and the systematic marginalization of certain voices in adaptation are all reflect and perpetuate existing power structures. However, adaptation can also facilitate cross-cultural understanding and dialogue when approached with respect and awareness. The key distinction lies in whether adaptation honors the source culture's perspectives and the meanings, or merely extracts surface elements for exotic appeal. Ethical adaptation across cultures requires genuine engagement with cultural contexts, collaboration with the members of the source culture, and the humility about the limits of one's own understanding. Representation and the social responsibility. Contemporary adaptation faces highlighted scrutiny regarding representation. Audiences and critics increasingly demand that adaptations consider their social impact, particularly considering race, gender, sexuality, adaptability, and other aspects of identity and power. This attention reflects growing awarenesses that cultural products shape how people understand themselves and others. Brief adaptations face particular challenges. Should adaptations of historical texts reproduce their prejudices in the name of accuracy, or should they reimagine these works to reflect contemporary values? There are compelling arguments on both sides. Faithful reproduction of historical prejudice might serve critical purposes, revealing how these attitudes operated. Alternatively, updating representations can make classical stories accessible and relevant to diverse contemporary audiences. Casting decisions exemplify these tensions. Color blind casting, which casts actors without regard to race, aims to increase opportunity to challenge assumptions about who can play what roles. However, critics argue that truly colorblind casting is impossible in societies where race carries social meaning, and that such approaches can erase important aspects of in identity and experience. Identity conscious casting conversely considers how an actor's identity interacts with character and the narrative, potentially enriching adaptation through thoughtful engagement with difference. The debate over updating problematic elements reveals no easy answers. Adaptation that sanitize their sources risk dishonesty, suggesting these prejudices never existed, yet uncritical reproduction can perpetuate harm, especially when adapted works reach far larger audiences than originals. The most thoughtful adaptations find ways to acknowledge historical context while making clear that certain attitudes are not endorsed, using framing, emphasis, or interpretation to create a critical distance. Economic ethics and industry practice. The economics of adaptation raise their own ethical questions. Major adaptations require substantial financial investment, creating pressures toward commercial viability that can compromise artistic integrity. The domination of adaptation by large studios and streaming platforms, meaning that certain types of stories, those deemed sufficiently marketable, receive adaptation, while others languish as obscurity. This economic reality perpetuates inequality. Works by established canonical authors receive repeated adaptation, while equally worthy works by marginalized writers struggle to find backing. The adaptation industry's risk aversion favors familiar properties with proven audiences, creating a self-reinforcing cycle where the already visible become more visible while the marginalized remain invisible. Fair compensation represents another economic concern, while original authors typically receive payment for adaptation rights. These deals often involve significant power imbalances. Struggling writers may accept inadequate compensation out of necessity or lack of negotiating power. Screenwriters, despite their central role in adaptation, frequently receive insufficient credit and compensation. Their contributions overshadowed by directors or source authors. Environmental and production ethics. Less frequently discussed but increasingly important are the environmental and labor ethics of adaptation production. Large-scale film and television production consumes substantial resources and generates significant waste. Blockbuster adaptations with their elaborate sets, extensive travel, and massive crews carry considerable environmental costs as climate change intensifies. These impacts warrant ethical consideration. Labor conditions in adaptation production also deserve attention. The film and television industries have documented problems with excessive working hours, unsafe conditions, and exploitation below the line workers. While these issues affect all production, the high profile nature of major adaptations and the substantial resources involved make them particularly appropriate subjects for ethical scrutiny. Adaptation and education. Adaptations play significant roles in education, often serving as students' introduction to clinical literature. This education function creates responsibilities when adaptations become substitutes for reading original texts. They shape literary understanding in lasting ways. Oversimplified or distorted adaptations can limit students' engagement with complex source material. However, adaptations can also enhance literary education by making texts more accessible, sparking interest that leads students to originals, and demonstrating how interpretation works. Film adaptations can help students visualize historical contexts, understand narrative structure, and develop critical thinking by comparing different versions. The key lies in how adaptations are used pedagogically as replacements for reading or as supplements that deepen engagement. Teachers and institutions bear responsibility for how they employ adaptations, presenting film versions without discussing their interpretive choices or limitations. Does students this service conversely through or thoughtfully integrated adaptation can enrich literary study, helping students understand texts as living entities subject to reinterpretation rather than fixed monuments. Accessibility and inclusion. Adaptations can serve important accessibility functions, making literature available to people with different abilities and learning styles. Audiobooks assist those with visual impairments or reading difficulties. Film adaptations can make narratives accessible to those who struggle with print literacy. These accessibility benefits represent genuine ethical value. However, accessibility also requires thoughtful implementation. Audio descriptions for visually impaired viewers, closed captions or captioning for deaf and hard of hearing audiences, and other accommodations should be standard rather than afterthoughts. When adaptations are created with accessibility in mind from the beginning, they serve broader audiences without compromising artistic quality. The concept of universal design, creating works that are accessible to the widest possible range of people, offers a framework of ethical adaptation practice rather than treating accessibility as a special accommodation. Universal design recognizes diversity as the norm and creates from that understanding applied to adaptation. This might mean considering from the outset how an adaptation will work for audiences with different abilities, backgrounds, and access to cultural capital. Ethical frameworks for evaluating adaptations. Several ethical frameworks can guide adaptation evaluation. A consequentialist approach considers adaptations effects. Do they expand or limit understanding? Do they perpetuate or change harmful stereotypes? Do they increase access to important stories or resist it? The ontological approach might focus on duties and rights, respecting source texts, honoring cultural originals, ensuring fair compensation, truthful representation. Virtue ethics offers another perspective, asking what qualities characterize good adaptation practice. Virtue relevant to adaptation might include creativity, respect, courage, humility, and integrity. A virtuous adapter approaches source material with genuine engagement, makes bold creative choices when warranted, acknowledges the limits of their understanding, and maintains honesty about their interpretive process. Care ethics emphasizes relationships and responsibilities to particular authors applied to adaptation. This framework highlights adapters' relationships with source authors, living or dead, source communities, audiences, and collaborations and collaborators. What does it mean to care well for a text and its state and stakeholders? How can adaptation practice embody attentiveness and responsiveness to those affected by creative choices? So, conclusion toward ethical adaptation practice. Ethical adaptation requires ongoing reflecting and dialogue. There are no simple formulas or universal rule that resolve all dilemmas. Context matters. What serves a text well in one situation may be inappropriate in another. Cultural movement matters. Ethical obligations evolve as social understanding develops. Power matters. Who is adapting what for whom significantly affects ethical stakes. The most important ethical commitment may be to thoughtfulness itself, the willingness to consider implications, listen to criticism, acknowledge limitations, and remain open to learning. Ethical adaptation practice involves asking different questions without assuming easy answers, balancing competing values without pretending conflicts do not exist, and accepting responsibility for creative choices while recognizing that perfect solutions are impossible. This stances of reflective engagement more than any specific conclusions characterizes ethically serious adaptation work. Thank you so much for watching me teaching you the second session of literary adaptation. We will continue tomorrow, the last and the final hour of the literary adaptation material. Until next time, ta-ta for now.